Yeah, making a second video for the day. Yeah, draft physics presentation, second one, because I may not survive for another day, so I better make it today. Because yes, it's just hopeless. Just the despondency and depression over the state of intelligent life on Earth. There just isn't any. I mean, when smart people fall for this crap, it's just, you just know, well, fuck it. There's no point. So they've obviously just converted them all, so, the Sean Carrolls, Veritasium, now all talking this many worlds crap. Just no fucking rational foundation to build this on at all. Just absolute made up fairy tale mush. And they're selling it to these dupes. And the dupes are licking it up. Well, not entirely. He does have 524 dislikes, which has to be a record for one of his videos. So there's some sign of, a glimmer, of, possible intelligence, but just a glimmer, and just pitiful. So I'm going to play some of this. It's just premised on absolute horse shit. They just make this crap up. It has no, there's just no logical or evidenced or reason to believe, none of it. It just doesn't exist as a viable theory. It has no grounding to a single fact anywhere. There's not a fact that this horse shit is connected to.
A portion of this video was sponsored by Norton 360.
So, and then he's selling virus software. I mean, why don't you sell cures for cancer next? I mean, why don't you just lower the standard lower and lower virus software? I mean, Norton was a great guy 25 years ago. Or 30. When the internet first started, Norton was giving everything away for free. And then his name became associated with just the, almost as bad as, not as bad as McAfee, but just almost as bad in terms of causing more spam on your computer than it prevented. Taking control of the system and just extorting you for more money. It's disgusting he would sell virus software. I mean, again, why don't you just search, instant cancer cure in a bottle? Why don't you just sell that? Be a shill.
Mechanics is great. If you know the state of a system, say the position and velocity of a particle, then you can use an equation, Newton's second law, to calculate what that particle will do.
Yes, you can do the duh. Okay, it's really kind of obvious, okay, that the mass has everything to do with how momentum is going to manifest itself in an object and velocity. Things are really easily understood as being connected, and yes, it makes perfectly good sense. But no, let's not do that. Let's not do the thing that makes perfectly good sense.
In the future. In quantum mechanics, if you know the quantum state of a particle, that is, its wave function, you can use...
Okay, let's understand. A wave function is not something you can just know. Oh, I know it's the wave function. There, I know. No, wave function means that you know everything about the system, just about. So knowing its wave function isn't like just knowing, is it blue or is it green? No, it means like rolling dice. You have to know through experience or through logic that, yes, there's, 12 sides and, they're all going to come up evenly, and, that's the wave function then, once you figure out what the system is doing. So whether it's, and most of the systems analyzed are usually cyclical. That is, they are sort of circular, almost like a clock face. So once you know, there's 12 hours on the clock face, and so there's 12 possibilities of places to be, and there's each place a certain increment of time, then yes, you can move the future forward, and you move time backwards, and you can tell where the clock hand is going to be. But you have to know what the system is. You have to know how many hours are on the clock face. You have to know those facts, and if you don't know those facts, you don't have any wave function. You don't have your predictive knowledge. See, they're not predicting anything, right? They're not predicting that the clock has 12 faces on it. They're not predicting any of that. So when they say we can predict the system, no, you're predicting the outcome when you know the input, when you know every variable that's relevant. So if you know that when you throw the dice, you perfectly randomize them, then in the sense that they'll be quite reliably randomized because it's going to bounce a lot of times, do a lot of things, then you can know the probability of any one outcome. But again, it's not, you just know the wave function. It's green. No, none of that. So this is just such a lie. Okay, they don't know that shape until they know the curve of that line. And so it's almost obvious, right? Oh yeah, if I know the curve of the line, this is easy, isn't it? It's like doing, Einstein math in a sense. Once you know the inverse square law, yeah, it's really easy to draw the well. It's not difficult at all. It's just,
Use the Schrodinger equation to calculate what that particle will do in the future. Usually.
Right, and so again, this is only because every system is going to be complex, so that's where all these little extra doodars are there for. But it's really just the little forky symbol time forky symbol thing. You see those on both sides of the equation, which already should say to you, there's something wrong with this equation, right? They have the same things on both sides of the equation. Shouldn't they cross all that stuff out because it's the same shit? Yeah, they should.
It spreads out over time as it is doing here. Note, to make this animation, we really solved the Schrodinger equation.
So they didn't solve anything, okay? They invented a state, okay, that has a certain a condition, just like polishing glass, and it goes from a certain amount of reflective index, 16% to 0% as you polish, and it has a cycle. And so they invented a cycle, okay, and then established a system for the cycle. But that's it. They didn't solve anything. Okay, they just invented an imaginary system to analyze, and then they show you their imaginary system. That's just their whatever they used. It could have been imaginary. It could have been based on how fast water droplets flatten in gravity. It could have been based on a lot of things, but the outcomes have to be known. It already has to be known ahead of time before you do the Schrodinger equation. Before you solve it, you have to know almost everything there is to know about the system. Almost everything.
So there's a beautiful symmetry here. If you know the initial state, you can use an equation to evolve that state smoothly and...
Okay, so let's understand. That's just absolute bullshit. You have to know more than the initial state in any kind of sense of knowing just what the ball's momentum and velocity is as it's standing there and what force you're going to hit it with. You have to know about the atmosphere. You have to know about a whole bunch of other stuff to be able to describe what the probabilities are, the possibilities. So that's just crap. And we know when you hit the ball, there's only one outcome. It's always one outcome. It's always one event that can be traced through space. Nothing gets lost. Nothing gets, well, we don't know where it is right now. Okay, every bit of it, just like the clock face, we can guarantee the clock is never pointing to 13. Never a problem, never a worry.
Continuously into the future. The problem is, in quantum mechanics, we never actually observed a wave function like this.
That's right. You don't just, it's just not a thing. The wave function isn't a thing. Okay, it's a circumstance, a complex circumstance, dependent on what kind of system, again, you're measuring the probability of, and what you know about why it has that probability. Like, you could argue there's an explanation for why, as you take glass off the surface of glass, that its reflective index changes, because it can be argued that glass is technically a liquid and that the atoms really are realigning. Every time you're polishing, you're changing all the atoms in the glass. Just a fact that explains exactly why there's a connection between how much glass you're taking off and how reflective it is, because you're changing the position of the atoms.
Instead, when we measure it, we find the particle at a single point in space.
So he draws a single point in space as a big, giant, coney thing, right? Well, that's not what it is. Okay, a single point in space is a straight line to a single point in space. So they can't even illustrate a single point in space in some sort of rational way with a rational single line with a single point at the end, right? So it's like, what the fuck? That's not a single point in space. There is no probability of all that other stuff. There's just the one thing at the tip, the point. Yeah, that's the answer. The thing at the tip, the point. Yeah.
So how are we to reconcile the spread-out wave function evolving smoothly under the Schrodinger equation with this?
Okay, smoothly under the Schrodinger equation, right? Under full knowledge of the experiment you're doing. So under full knowledge that there's two dice and they each have 6 sides and they each have the right numbers, the same number of 1s, the same number of 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. So you know all of that going in. And then you're saying, look how genius I am. I have this equation that predicts that I'm going to get one of those as an outcome. 2 1s, 2 2s, 2...
point-like particle detection. Now, I think it's understandable that when the founders of quantum theory approached this problem, they considered the measurement...
There's no problem, right? So, again, this is just all horseshit. It's very nice. They come up with an equation to make their mathematics easier because it basically does the vector math for them. So they're really combining vectors of the possibilities. You could say you can understand a possibility as a line to a point in space, which would be, this is describing the fact that it goes up, and this line describes the fact that it goes down, or this one it goes left. And it's just like having two things hit each other, two round surfaces. I could say two round surfaces could hit each other right like that, and they'll bounce off clean, or they could hit each other at an angle, and they'll bounce off like this, or they hit each other just the right angle, and they'll bounce off like that. So I can understand all of those probabilities, and I can turn them into vectors, and then I can just add all the vectors, right? And so that's all the Schrodinger equation does. That's why Feynman made it simpler by just saying, I can do you one better. Okay, I can make it even simpler. And just think of the probabilities as a clock that spins, because these probabilities are all nuanced to each other. They're all just a little bit different than the one before, okay? But they're all sequential, and they all recur as probabilities. So everything that happens going this way, the top surface, is the same as the stuff happening on the bottom surface. That kind of symmetry. There's symmetry to the thing they're analyzing. So if they did this with a square, some object that had an imperfect probability, that is, the square wheel turning at the angles would have a much different effect on the ground than the flat parts, right? So it wouldn't work to do the Schrodinger equation because it's not doing a nice sinusoidal repeated pattern. It's doing an unrepeated lopsided pattern, and their equation can't handle that. You can't do simple vector math with that kind of probability, uneven probabilities.
More real than the wave function. After all, the measurement was something we had actually observed, and it matches our experience of a world of matter particles.
All right, it doesn't match anything in my experience, doesn't match anything in my imagination. This is worse, in my opinion, than a God theory. It's so incomprehensibly silly that I should think real solid things are doing this mushy bullshit. So mushy bullshit like this somehow creates this reliably solid world where everything stays where it's supposed to be and nothing does anything extraordinary, nothing does anything wooey at all. All right, but I'm supposed to believe the internal universe, the thing that's made out of, is a bunch of wooey bullshit.
It's harder to say what the wave function was exactly. Schrodinger formulated...
Right, so let's understand, Schrodinger hated when they did this to his equation, when they turned it into woo. Okay, he was totally against the woo, and that's why he invented thought experiments with Einstein to point out, you people are turning into religious nuts. So Einstein and Schrodinger are saying, you people are religious kooks. Okay, God doesn't play dice with the universe. The moon doesn't disappear when I close my eyes. I don't need somebody to look at it. I don't need no fucking collapsing any wave function to goddamn have a moon in the sky. This is all just a horse shit. So, this is the irony of it, right? It's like Einstein being credited with all this supersonic space bullshit, gravitational waves, all this stuff. They put Einstein's name on it. Einstein hated it. He would hate it. Thoroughly hate it.
His wave equation because scientists, notably de Broglie, suspected that matter...
Right, so de Broglie is this idiot, or they don't even say his name right. I mean, they say it's supposed to be just de Broglie. But anyway, de Broglie. So this is this nonsense, right? That all of a sudden, because we can sometimes understand that the effect on a system is affected by frequency, that things are tipped over by frequency. So if I shoot bullets at the right weight, at the right rate, I can tip something over because I keep hitting it with a bullet when it's moving in the right direction. So I keep adding energy in that direction. I can tip it over. But if I shoot the bullets not recognizing that I have to shoot them at the right sequence, then the thing just wobbles and it never falls down. So I can understand that there's a different effect that can happen because of frequency. So frequency can look energetic. But there's no evidence that frequency is energy. And yet they've turned it into that. They've said frequency equals momentum. That the two things are totally related to each other, like they're the same thing. So velocity and mass is the same thing as frequency. So now they've taken things that have velocity and mass, electrons or protons or physical bodies or Volkswagens, and they've said they have a frequency, even though they don't have a frequency, because they have a probability equation that's based on frequency. Because they think frequency is fucking energy when it isn't.
has wave-like properties, but it took a third physicist, Max Born, to propose how we should interpret the wave function. At each point in space, the wave function has a complex amplitude, essentially just a real number plus an imaginary number.
Right, so he says it's supposed to be this simple thing, the wave function, and here he's conceding, oh yeah, it has this unreal number, and it has a Hamiltonian, and it has all kinds of wacky shit in it, right? So it's not some kind of simple thing. Oh, here's a wave function, here it is. I can hold it in my hand, a little wave function, it's a nice simple object. No, it's nothing like that. It's a complex pile of pre-knowledge of how a system is going to act. The equation doesn't solve anything. The wave function is the answer. Once you have that, once I already watch somebody spin a roulette wheel a few hundred times, I already know what the outcome is going to be, right? I already figured out that, yes, it's pretty much random. It's going to fall in one of those slots and one of those numbers equal number of times. I already know the answer. I don't need any fucking equation.
Max Born suggested if you take that amplitude and square it, you get the probability of finding the particle there. The fact that you have to square the amplitude actually appears as a last-minute footnote in...
Right, and this is just the Feynman addition. It's just making that clear, that that's how vector math works. You add one vector this way, and then you add another vector to it this way, and then the hypotenuse, you take the square of the hypotenuse, and that gives you the probability. So it's really kind of simple, and it's just probability math. But you have to know ahead of time what the odds are before you can predict the outcomes. So you're just predicting the fact that, yes, once I know the dice are reliable, they only have certain things written on them, and I'm going to roll them into a randomizer, I can predict quite reliably that a certain amount of this will come up, and a certain amount of that, and a certain amount of that, and a certain amount of that. If I do 1,000 rolls, I can predict what the outcome of the 1,000 rolls is going to be. So again, they're not predicting the outcome of every event. They're completely evading any obligation to predict actual events. They're predicting what happens when you keep running the system and there's nothing to that prediction. It's like predicting the precession of something. Once you know all the facts, the precession just falls out of the data. Hardly miraculous. And everything that this equation predicts can be predicted with other math. You don't need the Schrodinger equation to do any quantum mechanics. You can live completely without it, ever knowing it even existed, and other theories, other mathematical models will give you the answer. Will make the prediction. It was just something making it a little more concise. That's it. It adds no value. It just makes it condenses the length of the equation. That's it. It makes the equation smaller. It doesn't change the fact that it's using other equations and other mathematical circumstances, like Pythagorean theory, for example.
Born's paper. But that is how probability was introduced into the core of our picture of reality.
Right. So again, probability wasn't introduced. Randomness was introduced. That's what they did. Okay. The fact that there was a probability is something Newton knew. Newton already knew all this crap. We didn't need no Schrodinger equation to tell him, okay, there's a certain probability for a certain outcome when I rub a certain amount of glass off of a surface. He already knew that. Okay. So he was already predicting outcomes. So this is just horseshit. Probability was, they already knew that about dice. They already knew that about roulette wheels. They already knew the existence of probability. Now they're introducing some wacky notion that has nothing to do with how I throw the dice. It has nothing to do with what the condition the dice are before I throw them. It has nothing to do with any physical circumstance. Now they're saying everything is randomized by some special random generator. That the universe isn't a mechanical thing playing out a cause and effect reality. That it's somehow cause and effect has nothing to do with it. That it's a probability equation. So when I throw the dice at Las Vegas, it doesn't have a goddamn thing to do with how the dice mechanically bounce. That's not dictating the outcome. The outcome is being dictated by some probability, because as soon as I let the dice go, they went into amorphous entanglement space and they lost all their identity. That's their theory. Okay, so the smallest things in the universe, the thing we can't see, is where all of this bullshit takes place. It doesn't happen to any of the big objects. It doesn't happen in any big reality. No, just in the special little universes where all this magic takes place. That's where God lives. So they've just taken God out of heaven and put it into quantum mechanics. It's a frickin' religion. Wake up and smell the religion.
It's a pretty big philosophical leap. I mean, no longer is the universe deterministic. This made a lot of scientists, especially Einstein, uncomfortable.
It didn't make him just uncomfortable. It made him want to throw the fuck up. What's the point of doing physics if you're just going to make up gods? You're just going to make up magical events that happen for magical reasons. It just spontaneously decided to decay. So nothing happens for any physical reason anymore, right? Like they think decay is a random event. They think it just happens. Someday the two atoms can just be sitting there and there's no way to tell the difference. The two atoms, one's going to decay and one's not going to decay, and there's no difference between the atoms. One just spontaneously says, I have to decay now. When logic tells you, no, the truth is I can put all those atoms right next to each other and I can make them decay faster. So I can change the probability of their decay. So this decay thing must have something to do with the environment. The environment must be causing the decay, because if I change the environment, the thing decays faster. So it's not just some random spontaneous event. It's some cause and effect event that takes place because actual physical circumstances exist that make it happen. Just like when something's going through a fucking slit, some of the stuff goes right fucking through the middle and some stuff goes right near the edge. And those two worlds are different worlds. But no, that rational answer isn't the answer. The answer is that no matter where it goes, it's random. That's their bullshit answer, because they want to create a wacky verse. They want to create a world where they're not dumb fucking idiotic robots. Because that's too humiliating, because they think they made who they are. I did it spontaneously. I became me through a spontaneous great event that I caused with my spontaneous wand. So frickin' religion.
But the Born rule, as it is now called, remains at the heart of quantum mechanics because it is spectacularly successful.
No. Spectacularly successful is a spectacular exaggeration. It isn't spectacularly successful. It's just a lie. The other math that gets the answer does it just as well. So again, this is just part of the hype and the bullshit. The spectacular God miracles. These are just stories they tell each other, and there's no story. There's no actual, real, spectacular event. This equation never did anything spectacular in its life. Okay, it never did. They just keep talking about all these heroic adventures that the Schrödinger equation went on. It never went on any such adventure. It never cured anything. It never solved anything. It never did a fucking thing ever that you couldn't do with a wheelbarrow.
At predicting the outcomes of experiments. So the way quantum mechanics came to be understood, and the way I learned it, is that there are two sets of rules. When you're not looking, the wave function simply...
So more nonsense. When you're not looking, which is just complete nonsense, right? Because you don't look at anything anyway, right? And it takes time for the frickin' photons to get to you anyway. So what is looking? Oh, radiation hits something and it bounces off to something and I detect the radiation. So I'm detecting its position and its existence by the fact that some radiation bounced off of it a certain amount of time ago. Okay, I'm seeing it lag, but and somehow their argument is it didn't really exist until that photon hit it. Somehow it was in more than one state. Somehow it was at Pluto, it was in Saturn, it was over there, it could have been anywhere, it could have been any who knows what, superimposed over any number of amounts of space. And it didn't decide to show up until the photon was traveling through nothing and all of a sudden hit the magical thing that decided to show up here instead of over there by some random event. It decided it wasn't on Pluto and instead it's on Saturn. I mean, just a pile of crap.
Evolves according to the Schrödinger equation. But when you are looking, when you make a measurement, the wave function collapses suddenly and irreversibly. And
the truth is that nothing's probable, right? So again, this is the part of what they don't understand. There's no such thing as probability. Every single event is an inevitability. Every single one of them. They're all cause and effect. They're all part of a chain of circumstances, and there's no way to escape that. So there is no real probability. All there is circumstances that cause so many variables that we can't follow the variables. We can't follow all the variables that are affecting the dice, and so therefore we can't predict the outcome of the dice. That's all. but it was inevitable. And the dice were in the hand, it was already inevitable. When the dice were, before he even picked it up, it was already inevitable how he would pick them up. It would already going to be inevitable how they were going to be thrown into space. It was already inevitable what they were going to hit. All of that is going to happen, and there was no physical way it's going to change. There's no variation in the outcome at all. The outcome is completely predictable if you have enough information. So understand, their religion is, okay, that they've decided, their God is, that no, it doesn't work that way. Things aren't cause and effect. Things are in amorphous states, and they spontaneously decide through some sort of magical mechanism to be state 1 or state 2. And they don't do it by some kind of reasoning, like state 1 is better than state 2. So it's not like a God, right? So their God is an imbecile. So they've created a God merely for the purpose of going turn left, turn right. Yeah, I'm not going to judge whether right and left is better. I'm just going to sit there and decide for you to turn left and turn right. So instead of having the dice bounce off the things, do all this stuff to come up snake eyes, they're saying, no, we just randomize everything and pretend there's nothing there. Just like their field theory, they pretend that, I can have the Saturn and Pluto and these real planets in space, and I can understand they're creating a field that changes the field around me, right? What's going to affect me. They shoot photons through space that are coming towards me. They do all kinds of things that are going to affect me. And they pretend, let's pretend there are no sources for the changes in the field. We'll just put the changes in the field. We'll just put the light in the field. We won't care the fact that it had to come from Saturn, that reflected off of it and bounced towards here. We'll just pretend that didn't happen. Why would you do that? Why would you negate the sources? Well, that's because they want to create a religion.
Probability of measuring any particular outcome is given by the amplitude of the wave function associated with that outcome squared.
Right. Again, so he's just saying the same thing. And again, this is just this simple logic, okay, that you have a certain, the length of this line is going to be its probability. So it's more probable you get the number 7, okay, because there's more ways to make a 7. So 7 has a higher probability, right, than 2. 2 only has one chance, snake eyes, so it has a very little line. And you add those two up if you want to know the total, or you can subtract them or multiply them. You can do different things to those vectors, but all you're doing is stacking those vectors on top of each other and adding them up to find out what the total probability is. So you take all of the dice totals, and they all will make a little vector, and you can create a line for the probability. But that's all it is. So obviously this thing, right, this little thing is going to have a different hypotenuse. Okay, they're going to make different hypotenuses, and this one squared is going to be a smaller area than this one squared. You could sort of understand that, right? If I was to make a triangle out of this, that this triangle is going to be a lot smaller than this triangle. Yeah. Duh. So that's all this fancy talk means.
Now, Schrödinger himself hated this formulation, which is actually why he invented the famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment.
No, he hated the whole direction that physics was taking, the Bohr religious kooks. Okay, you all became fans of woo, okay, of a universe that wasn't clockwork, that wasn't mechanical, a universe that has hope for your little fairy tales, your little wishy-washy baby physics. And so you all became a bunch of fans of baby physics. And the fact is in the fact that there was no rational counter-argument to Schrödinger cat. That's why we're still talking about. But you have no rational counter-argument to what a fallaciously idiotic notion this is, that somehow the radioisotope doesn't know what state it's in. No, it's a ticking time bomb. Okay, it's going to go off. And it's going to go off for real physical reasons, not imaginary ones. Okay, real physical things, real physical causes are called and cause it to decay. It's not something that's an unknown in the universe. It's not something that's going to mysteriously happen. It's going to happen. It's not going to spontaneously decay. It's going to decay as a byproduct of a circumstance. Just like fuses don't spontaneously light, just like lots of things don't spontaneously happen. None of it is spontaneous. None of it just happens for no reason. And that's their religion. There's no reason to believe any of this crap. And that's what Einstein and Schrödinger were attempting to point out, is this is all leads nowhere. This is like the silly God botherers thinking they've answered the creation problem by creating a creator that doesn't need to be created. It's logical mush.
Put a cat in a box with a radioactive atom. add a radiation detector that triggers the release of poisonous cyanide gas. Now, although it was only meant as a thought experiment, Schrödinger helpfully notes this device must be secured against direct interference by the cat. Anyway, the whole point of the experiment is to magnify the state of the atom up to the state of something macroscopic and tangible. He could have picked anything. It didn't have to be alive, but Schrödinger selected a cat. If the atom decays, the detector detects radiation, releases the poison, and the cat dies. If the atom doesn't decay, the detector doesn't detect radiation, poison is not released, and the cat remains alive. Since the state of the cat and detector apparatus are directly tied to the state of the atom, we say they are entangled.
Right, but they're not entangled by anything but circumstance, so it's completely doesn't mean anything. There's no real entanglement here. There's no real connection. The cat isn't going to decide when the radioactive isotope decays. The cat's not going to decide a single thing about it. It has absolutely no influence. So there's no entanglement. The entanglement's only in one direction, which means it's not real entanglement by any kind of definition. The one thing has no causal effect, and the other thing has all the causal effect. So what's the point of even calling it entangled? But the real point is that there's no two states here. There's no place where it isn't a fact. Okay, it's not a matter of probability when that particular isotope. Okay, if you take a million isotopes, this is like rolling the dice a million times. Each time you roll the dice, there is no probability. There's inevitability each time, because the circumstances are different. If I can make the circumstances exactly the same, you know the outcome would be the same. You know that if I flip a penny in the air, you can see exactly how many times it turns in the air. You can see it land on the hand. You could see it and know that it was inevitable that it will come out that way. So all I have to do is reduce the amount of energy I put into the penny, just flip it a little bit, and I'll know there's a 100% chance that it's going to come up heads. I can make it so I can predict 100% of the time it's going to be heads. There is no entanglement. There is none of this wooey bullshit that because the penny left my thumb, it's inevitable that it's 50-50. No, it's not 50-50 anymore. I can make it so it's 70-30. I can make it almost any number I want to make it by eliminating the number of variables. And that can be demonstrated to these retards. That they can figure this out on their own. They shouldn't need Schrödinger cat. You can make up a million different kinds of ways of describing Schrödinger cat, but they're saying the same thing, okay? If I sit there and just flip the coin, just flip it over. Flip it. Okay, it's sitting here on my thumb, the heads. I just flip it over onto a tissue and it lands tails. Right? You know that if I do that over and over and over again, it's going to make tails every fucking time. Okay? There's no entanglement. There's no probability. It's inevitability. And every single one of them's inevitability. It's inevitable when that fucking isotope is going to decay. It's inevitable based on the environment it's in, because basically its decay is just a really improbable circumstance where, I gave the Star Wars example, where you're trying to destroy the Death Star, and the way you destroy it is you shoot torpedoes both into two exit vents at the same time, and they hit the center of the Dark Star and blow it up, right? So maybe it only happens 1 in a million times, right? But you know that it's going to eventually happen when you do enough shooting, that eventually you'll get the timing right, and eventually it'll blow up, and it'll happen a certain number of times out of your probability, out of the number of times you try. And, each one of those tries is just recognizing the fact that this is how much you can be off. You can be off this much, or you can be off this much. So, all I have to do is make more errors possible, and then I make your outcome less likely. So I just make it bigger and bigger and bigger. Or I can make it smaller and smaller and smaller. I can make the likelihood of decay more probable by putting a whole bunch of isotopes right next to each other, so they're shooting a bunch of energy back and forth at each other. And now it's more likely that one of those torpedoes will meet head on. So I can increase the likelihood. So why are you people believing this complete crap?
Where things get weird is that according to quantum mechanics, the state of the atom does not have to be either decayed or not decayed. Generally, it's in a superposition of both, decayed and not decayed at the same time.
So again, there's absolutely no reason, no evidence, no logic, no chain of anything that makes you think that because it's a system you can't see, that somehow it's different than the penny. That it's not a system I can manipulate. I can manipulate that isotope just as well as I can manipulate a penny. I can cause it to decay faster. I can change its probability. And that's evidence that the probability isn't built into the thing. It's built into the circumstance. I change the environment. I change the circumstance. I change the outcome. This is just such crap.
Assuming no measurements have been made. This superposition state of the atom gets entangled with the detector, and then the cat. So after some time, the wave function of everything inside the box is in a superposition of the atom has not decayed, poison not released, cat alive state, and the atom has decayed, poison released, cat dead state. So according to quantum mechanics, the cat really is both alive and dead at the same time.
Which is just silly, okay? And no reason for any rational person to believe that there was any problem at all with the atom knowing the difference between being decayed and not being decayed. It never had to go into any superposition of both states. There's no reason for it to enter any doubtable circumstance. It either is in the state of decaying, it's blowing up. A bomb is either blowing up or not blowing up. It's never in a state of I blew up and I didn't blow up. This is just so fucking stupid.
Only when we open the box and make a measurement does the wave function collapse, and the cat actually becomes either dead or alive. These days, Schrodinger's cat is often used as a way to show how weird quantum mechanics is.
No, how stupid and silly and moronic, and what a waste of brain space, what a waste of neurons. This is what fucking smart people are doing with the time. This is the most disgusting kind of wankery. I mean, I would rather you jerk off to, like, short giraffes. I can't even imagine you doing, having sex with something more disgusting than this silly woo. This is such a bastard of any kind of realness. It's so fucking anti-reality. It's disgusting. It is worse than stupid Jeebus stories. I'd rather you were a religious kook in the literal sense than this fake, wooey, new age mush. Your magical crystals.
But that wasn't Schrodinger's point. He wanted to show that quantum mechanics as formulated
is ludicrous crap.
Was wrong. So, taking up Schrodinger's argument in the...
It's silly. It's hysterically silly. He hysterically pointed out, he made a good joke. He really just look how fucking silly these assholes are. This is what they believe.
This video, I want to show that there is a better...
I think Schrodinger killed himself, right? Yeah. I think it's,
better way to think about Schrodinger's cat. In fact, a better way to think about quantum mechanics entirely that I'd argue is more logical and consistent.
Yeah, it's more logical. I'm going to invent a verse out of... I'll just make a gigantic Schrodinger lump and say everything is in it. Yeah, everything's entangled by the magical entanglement thingy. Why? Why is everything entangled? First, the idea is they have twins. Like two things pop out of something and somehow they're connected to each other. So you have some reason to believe they're entangled, right? Because at least they're twins. But they're saying, no, everything's entangled. There's not just two things entangled. Two things didn't somehow be entangled. They're saying that somehow this thing's entangled with this, and somehow it's entangled with that, and somehow it's entangled with that, and that, and that, and that, even though there's no explanation for how it got entangled with something else. Because it wasn't, like, made at the same time or something. It didn't come out of the same vagina. Why is it fucking entangled? And they have no explanation for that. They just sit there and say, all of a sudden I'm going to entangle everything. So even though something is not entangled, it's just dependent, right? I'm dependent on this thing being here or not being here. My world changes if the two things are different. But I'm not entangled in any direct way. I'm consequentially entangled with everything, but I'm not entangled in any real sense of the word entangled.
There, we have to examine the three essential components of Schrodinger's cat: superposition, entanglement, and measurement, to see if any of them is flawed.
They're all silly as concepts, so there's just what's the point of even having the conversation? Superposition is saying it's in two places at once, or it's two things, or just make it up. It's just completely nonsense. This thing isn't a thing. It's somehow over there and over there and over there and over there, and it didn't decide to be here until I put my fingers like this and reached it and grabbed it, even though I shouldn't technically be able to know it was even here. But anyway, I just reached into space and it just happens to be in the right space where my hands reached. Anyway, entanglement, again, they're not making any sense. They're saying two things are entangled, and yet they're going to say the same entanglement equation covers everything in the universe all at once. Everything is entangled. How is everything entangled? I don't get it. Yes, cause and effect. Everything's entangled through cause and effect, but that entanglement is not ESP. It's not faster than the speed of light. It's not any of that stuff. So they don't even have a consistent word for this stupid word entanglement. And then measurement, of course, means absolutely nothing, because measurement to them just means every time a piece of energy of any kind hits anything, okay, there's a new universe. I mean, what the fuck? That's measurement. Measurement is just an event. So stuff moving through space that doesn't hit anything is completely inert, right? Nothing's happening until it hits something. Then something happens, right? So I don't know. They call that measurement.
Superposition is the idea that quantum objects can be in two different states at the same time. This seems like a crazy idea and something we'd never observed.
Right. It seems stupid. It seems silly. It seems unevidenced. It seems no reason to believe it. It seems like completely mushy, waste of time nonsense. Why don't I just believe in three bears? Why don't I just believe in Goldilocks? Why don't I Puss in Boots? It doesn't matter. Why don't you just make up any preposterous kind of nonsense? Why are you doing this? We don't need a God theory. There's no reason not to understand that that thing they're drawing as this amorphous blob of crap, okay, isn't a blob of crap. It has a cycle. It has a real. It's a real event. If I polish glass off the surface of glass, the glass is gone. I moved it. I took it off. It's someplace else. Okay, it's not an imaginary event. It's a real event. The glass has changed. Now the circumstances changed. Cause and effect. It didn't just magically change its reflective index. I had to physically do something to it to change it.
We do indirectly with the double slit experiment. Fire individual electrons through.
So again, they call it the double slit experiment when they're doing it with electrons. So they always are so selective. Okay, it's just so again they go back to this stupid experiment, and it's already demonstrated that they don't have a consistent theory even for this experiment. That the math doesn't fucking goddamn work. So they're perfectly predictive, always fantastic math doesn't even get the right answers, and so it's all part of their hype. So this is just propaganda, right? There's no other way. There's nothing else to call this but propaganda. So let's get a hunk of this propaganda, and I'll point out the obvious questions they will not answer.
Two slits at a screen, and the pattern you see is not just the sum of electrons going separately through one slit and the other slit. It is an interference pattern.
All right, so he's saying quite clearly that in the single slit with electrons, so electrons go through a single slit, they don't diffract. They go straight right through. That's what he's showing right there. Right? That's it. Two lines. That's all you're going to get. So if I put the slits far enough away from each other, theoretically, right? I mean, how far away do they have to be? Do we have any evidence of that? No. So if I have I have a slit here, and then I put this other slit, way over here. He's saying that the electrons will go just straight through. That's what he says. That's what he's drawn right there. That's clearly the implication. Now, we already know that with photons, so here's the inconsistency, right? Because the electrons and the photons are supposed to be doing exactly the same thing. The same probability wave function events are supposed to be happening. They're supposed to be turning into magical things, okay, that have a wave function. So what happens, why is it then that when a photon does exactly the same experiment, I shoot a photon in here, the photon will in fact create a perfectly real, nice bar interference pattern? Do they have an explanation? Okay, water doesn't do that. Photons, light photons do that. What do electrons do when I put them through a single slit? Does he answer that question? No. He plays this idiotic game, okay, where they don't seem to know the real answer is you get the pattern with a single slit. That's the truth. Okay, so the truth is that this single slit creates two waves that have to interfere with each other to create the goddamn pattern. Right? And then all of a sudden, they just change the rules altogether, and they say, here, when I make two slits, right, I got two slits here, I make two slits, all of a sudden, I don't create four waves. So how come? How come there's not four waves coming out of here? If two waves are made by a single slit, why aren't four waves made by a double slit? No answer. Why, in the double slit experiment, they have no math for this. Okay, they have no theory for it. Let me put it that way. They can contrive math, but they can't contrive a theory. All right, so we know that in the double slit experiment with photons, the pattern comes out like this. All right, so that's a fact. All right, photons create this pattern, electrons create this pattern. Okay, and electrons create the gradual thing. Okay, gradually on, gradually off, gradually on, gradually off. Photons create little bars of light. Totally inconsistent outcomes. So they don't have any explanation for these two patterns, right? This pattern versus these little line patterns. They have no explanation for why that's happening. It doesn't happen with water waves. Their wave theory doesn't account for it at all. So, and they just deny the physics altogether. They deny the fact that when there's a slit, okay, they're saying it right to your face, and you're believing this. They're saying it doesn't matter whether the photon goes in here, doesn't matter whether it goes in here, doesn't matter whether it goes straight through the middle. Each one of these photons has the same probability of ending up here, here, or here. Each one has the same probability of going to any one of these locations. Okay, it doesn't matter where it goes through the slit. The physics, they're saying that physically, okay, this surface isn't any different, all right, next to this object than the going straight through the middle. That those two environments are identical. That's their physical argument. And why are you people believing this crap? Why? Why the fuck are you so adamant and so confident and so convinced that this idiotic, inconsistent nonsense is the fucking truth? This is what they're basing it on. A misinterpretation, a distortion of the facts. Do you really believe that the electrons create a straight little bar when I put them through a single slit? Do you have any evidence that of them ever doing the experiment to detect exactly how, if they're theoretically correct, with that drawing, if that fucking drawing has anything to do with fucking goddamn reality, why don't you ask them to do the experiment? Well, if this goes straight and makes one little bar, one little bit of light here, why don't you take the two slits and move them closer and closer together and tell me exactly when the second slit all of a sudden causes the magical pattern? Because they don't have the evidence, because they never even did the experiment. That's how little curiosity about reality they have. They want to believe the woo, and they'll quote mine the evidence to demonstrate the woo. They'll keep telling you it's like a water wave when water waves don't do that. Do the multi-slit electron experiment and see what the pattern looks like. And then do it with photons and see that the pattern is actually an image at all the locations. It's not random. You can't randomize and make an image. So their theory of random can't be right. Right? I mean, I can't send photons in that have a pattern to them, Donald Duck, let's say, and I can't randomize Donald Duck, the photons, and then send them out and expect to get Donald Duck again, can I? No, you can't. Complete crap. Provably crap. And you people just keep asserting, oh, this is the truth. No, this is a religion. And these are propagandists for the religion.
We are forced to conclude that a single electron somehow goes through one slit and the other slit simultaneously.
So we're forced to conclude. Are they really forced to conclude that it doesn't matter, that you really believe it doesn't fucking matter? Okay, I can make a slit and it just doesn't matter. Now, see, some things you can figure out just obviously without having much brains. You can sort of figure out that if I make a really wide slit, okay, that the number of electrons that will not be affected is going to be huge. And I'm going to get a giant pile of electrons piling up, right? And that this is going to be a tiny amount of the light. These peripheral ones will be a very small proportion of the light and they'll be totally drowned out. I'll never be able to see them. It's like the argue spot, right? I mean, when you do this thing where you put a little round disc in front of the light, and then you get a little tiny dot of light right in the center, but no other lines. Well, you can sort of understand that, oh yeah, you really did make the ring pattern. It's just the only place you can see it, because it's such a tiny amount of light, is in the very middle. Because in the very middle, every single photon's hitting the same spot. So that's why you see it. Where with the rings, all the photons have to make the whole ring. So they're spread out and they don't make enough of an impression for you to see because there's just not enough photons, not enough light hit the surface for you to see the rings. But the rings are there. And all you're seeing is the very center because every single photon hits the very center. But anyway, so you can tell, big slit, yeah, you're not going to see shit. Okay, but if I narrow that slit, narrow it, and you really believe that it doesn't matter whether it hits there, goes there, or goes right through the middle. You really think going right next to the surface is the same as going right through the middle. You think that's how electrons work. Even though you know that this surface has electrons on its surface that are going to repel those electrons as they're traveling by the surface. You got to know that, right? It's not going to like being there. That's going to get deflected by the electrons. Electrons deflect electrons. You do know that, right? This is pathetic.
This is superposition. Of course, it's easy to understand superposition with waves. They are spread out in space. And it's clear.
No, it's not easy at all. We know that the water molecules are real water molecules, that they're all really moving or not moving, that there's real pressure that moves through any medium. It's real pressure in real locations. It's not some superimposed nonsense. It's really there. Okay, there's real pressure moving through the medium. Real. It affects real atoms every time. Real atoms have to be affected for there to be a wave. Real atoms hit real atoms.
Here, how the peak of a wave from one slit cancels with the trough of the wave from another slit to produce the interference pattern. And luckily we know that when we're not looking...
So luckily we know that this is all just a bunch of bullshit, right? So we know that the photon pattern isn't the same. It isn't gradually on, gradually off, gradually on, gradually off. We know Newton's rings don't come out any way like that. We know the interferometer rings, nothing like that, right? Solid bright bars, solid dark line, solid bright bar, solid dark line. Nothing like this. The flaws in their own theory are huge, and they just keep pretending it all fits. No, it doesn't all fit. It doesn't fit at all.
Electrons are represented by a wave, the wave function. The double slit experiment then is concrete evidence that this wave enables individual electrons to pass through both slits at the...
All right, so it's concrete evidence that the electrons went through both slits. I mean, how is it evidence of that? How did they in any way prove that every other explanation can't be valid? How did they say that, in any way, this is a substantially firm foundation we're building this on? This is as proven as evolution. This is so solid. This is just, we know this to be true. And no other explanation is viable. I mean, it's disgusting propaganda.
Same time. So superposition is on solid ground. The next concept...
So again, just crap. Solid ground. Solid ground. He draws actual waves. He draws stuff actually going somewhere. And yet he claims that's solid foundation for superposition. Right? Well, yes, because he knows, well, I'm going to retract all of those waves. None of those probabilities happened. Only this one did. You see, only the magical one. All the others tried to happen. They actually, went all the way to the door, but they didn't walk inside. And so therefore, and it didn't cost me any extra energy to walk to every single door and not go inside. The only one that was real is the one where I knock on the door and I go inside. All the other walks I did, no energy involved. Oh, this is just such crap.
Is entanglement. Consider two electrons fired toward each other with equal and opposite velocities. We know they will scatter off each other, but we don't know exactly how. Their trajectories are given by spread out wave functions that only...
Alright, so this is more crap. So they say in 1 minute they can predict anything, and now they can't predict the simple thing? If you know their trajectories, then you'll know what will happen. Obviously, the point is we can't see these tiny things, so we can never know exactly where something is. Now, if we actually do know, like this is another experiment they've never done, but I mean, clearly with these slit experiments, they could fire, the electrons. See, electrons, it's hard to make a really small beam of electrons, really hard to make a small beam of photons. But the truth is now, they probably do have lasers good enough. So they could, in fact, take a double slit experiment, and they probably do have a laser good enough for this, and they could aim it. They could just aim the laser here, and then aim the laser here, and see what the outcomes are. And then aim the laser here, and then next to this surface, next to this surface, and they could just keep shooting it there and see where does the photon, where's the possibilities. What they're going to find out actually is that there's not going to be much, because they're obviously not going to be rebuilding photons because they're only sending them one place. So obviously they would have to be able to send them to numerous locations for them to reconstruct into a photon. So it's the whole problem. If you can't shoot photons one at a time, really, there's no such thing. It's just a notion we have because photons are only resolvable with a certain amount of energy. But the truth is, if you're making the photon out of two broken photons, you're definitely going to have to shoot them to both locations to see them remade again. But anyway, it's an experiment they haven't even tried.
Best probabilities. But as soon as we measure the momentum of one of the electrons, we immediately know the momentum of the other one. It must be equal and opposite, otherwise conservation of momentum would be violated.
So that's just more horseshit, right? I mean, this idea that they know they can create two entangled electrons, and through what process do they do that? There's no explanation. He just said it, like somehow this electron cares what this one's doing. So he's basically saying that when the electron goes through both slits by some magic, it's one single electron. When it hits this thing, the thing in the middle, it actually hits it. Okay, the fact is that some of the electrons get absorbed right there hitting it. So that we know that the electron doesn't split in two before it gets to here. because we know some of the electrons hit here. So how can it split in two if it ends up hitting here? This is just such horseshit that the electron is over here and goes through both slits, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, so this is only true for this fake thing. This thing they're saying is a wave function. It's not an electron anymore. It's not two different electrons that are entangled and going through some wave function. It's some sort of wave function. He calls it that. So why is he saying it's an electron when it's not an electron anymore?
Now, this may seem...
I mean, if I send two separate electrons in through the thing, I won't get the same outcome. So why is he claiming that it's the same? Well, anyway, I probably would get the same outcome.
Obvious. But consider that before the measurement, the momentum of each electron was in a superposition of states. Measuring one instantaneously collapsed the wave function of the other. And this would be true even if those electrons were light years apart.
Well, that's what it has to be true for your stupid, idiotic theory to make any sense. But so again, this presumes that the two electrons are going through some sort of different probability, like each wave function has a different probability, because if they went through symmetrically through the slits, that is, whatever goes through, well, they have to be randomized, so they have to have the same trajectory for each one. See, they're almost saying that one of these wave functions can go this way and one of them can go really slanted this way or something, and whichever one hits something first collapses the wave function and forces the other one to have gone this way instead of that way to be able to hit here. So, but there's no explanation of this collapse of any wave function.
These electrons are entangled. What's really going on here is that after interacting, the electrons do not have separate wave functions at all. They are described by a single wave function, and this is what it means to be entangled. This explains...
Right, so you could argue, okay, fine, if that's their bullshit, so they're going to just say the two electrons are under the same envelope. Well, that's fine, but you can't put the whole universe under one envelope because you haven't explained how I'm entangled. You didn't explain where I went through a slit, and where I was facing two slits and I went through both of the doors. You haven't explained where I got entangled somewhere. And then I had two entangled me's that interacted in the world, and then they created a new probability, a new inevitability by having an event. One of them entangled and created an outcome. You haven't explained how I'm entangled.
By measuring one immediately affects the state of the other one because the single wave function has collapsed. In fact, if we were being rigorous, we'd have to say that there is only one wave function, the wave function of the entire universe.
See, that's what doesn't make any sense. So they gave you an explanation for why these two things are now entangled, right? They were one thing, and they went through a process where they got entangled by splitting into two. So they explained why these two things are entangled, okay? And then they do their wooey bullshit and they turn back into one again. One here and one someplace else because we're doing this probability thing. So anything that was possible, they went to all of those locations. Theoretically, there was an outcome in all of them, even though they were never in any location. So they go in, the single thing goes in, nothing comes out but an envelope of probability. Yeah. Okay, there are no electrons entangled, right? Because they can't really be any place to be entangled if they're everywhere in the range of possibility, right? If the dice have every face 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, they have all of the amount, more sevens, all of those things are all mixed up when I throw the dice in a pile. That pile doesn't have any individual dice in it anymore. So this whole thing doesn't make any sense anyway. It's a blob of probability. Well, how does that blob of probability regarding this have anything to do with the screwdriver over here? They're not in the same equation at all. So how is he entangling this screwdriver with this? And saying now we're under one envelope of one big equation for the entire universe. What a pile of crap.
Which includes absolutely everything. But in the case of isolated, unentangled quantum particles, we can reasonably talk about their individual wave functions. And then once they interact with something else, entanglement is the result. So what we've seen is superposition is really the same thing as describing systems with waves. And entanglement means that after particles interact, they are described by a single wave function. These are fundamental parts of quantum theory, describing systems with wave functions that evolve according to the Schrödinger equation.
Right, and that is a way of just doing this geometry math, okay, of just figuring out, well, this is a longer bit of wavelength and I match the frequency, so all that makes some sense, but this makes no sense at all, that somehow, because this photon entangled itself and became a photon that landed in these different directions, that somehow it entangled itself with the rest of the universe somewhere. It didn't entangle with anything else. No other new wave function was created as a byproduct of it hitting a location. So once you've decided that it's done entangling and it landed in a location, how does that entangle it again? How does it get re-entangled?
Which leaves only measurement. Remember, the measurement postulate was added as a second set of rules to connect the mathematics of quantum mechanics to what we actually observe. But doesn't it seem weird that there should be one rule for how systems evolve when we're not looking, and a different rule for when we are? When you boil it down...
Right. Oh, only an imbecile would think those two things should be inconsistent. That's right. Only somebody looking for a religion or a wacky theory would believe any of that's credible. Yes, that's complete nonsense. Yes.
Measurement is just the interaction of one quantum system, electrons and photons, with another quantum system. And we know exactly how to deal with that. We simply evolve their wave functions according to the Schrödinger equation. So what if we throw out...
So again, saying this wave equation is a probability equation and ignoring that each one of these is an event. In the individual event, there is no wave equation for the individual event. It's just going to have an inevitable outcome. Right? That's the truth of it. And they just keep pretending that somehow the equation for what a billion flippings of the heads and the tails does defines what each event is going to be, and it doesn't. What's defining it is the variables I'm introducing. The number of variables defines the outcome, not anything else. As I point out, I can break the 50-50 of flipping heads and tails by just flipping very weakly, and I'll change it from 50-50 to 70-30.
All the rules associated with measurement. Well then, in the Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, the radioactive atom in a superposition of decayed and not decayed gets entangled with the detector and in turn the cat. Now remember, we are also made of electrons and atoms which obey the laws of quantum mechanics, so we are quantum mechanical too. So when we open the box, there is no measurement, no wave function collapse. We simply get entangled with the state of everything inside the box. So we see the cat alive, and we see the cat dead. Now how is that possible?
Why? Why would we even venture to think it is possible? Why? Why would we waste neurons playing this silly game that's saying because we've decided that atomic nuclei spontaneously in some sort of, for no reason, they decay. Well, even if I believe that they do that for no reason, I still have no reason to believe they're in two states, that they're decayed and undecayed. Why would I believe that?
I'm guessing you've never seen both an alive and dead cat before. But the solution is, it's because the you that saw the cat alive and the you that saw it dead actually inhabit separate worlds. By that I mean, they exist in their own complete realities, and those realities will never interact. But where did these separate worlds come from? Well, something I haven't mentioned yet are all the particles of the environment, the air molecules, photons, everything that we are not keeping track of. If a quantum object in a superposition gets entangled with the environment, it is said to undergo environmental...
Alright, so let's just understand that this is just nonsense, and what he's basically telling you is there's literally trillions of events taking place. Not just radioactive decay inside of me that's happening, but lots of events are taking place that are quantum events. And every time a new universe is created. And so that's happening on this huge scale of the entire universe, just an insane amount of mass of stuff. And they're saying the one equation, though, started off with all of the possibilities. So that means everything that could happen as a description of what if I change one tiny variable. And he's basically saying that somehow all of the things that do happen on the quantum scale have probabilities, not inevitabilities. That it's not the dice hitting the surfaces that decides what face shows up. He's saying literally to you, okay, it has nothing to do with it.
Coherence. This branches the wave function of the universe, essentially splitting the universe into two slightly different copies. So a more realistic account of Schrödinger's cat goes like this. The radioactive atom evolves from 100% not decayed into a quantum superposition of decayed and...
Right, for no good reason, right? I don't know why it does that. So every single atom, he's saying, is doing that right now. So every radioactive element in the universe right now is in a superposition of decayed and not decayed. Why is it in that superposition? How did it get in it? How did it be caused to be in a superposition? Why is it confused? It either is or isn't decayed. I mean, the supernovas either are supernovas or they're not supernovas, right? I mean, the stars are either a star or it's a supernova. It isn't superimposed. Why would it be superimposed? Why would it be confused about its state?
And not decayed. The detector becomes entangled with this superposition state of the atom. But the detector is being bombarded by all these...
See, this silly theory is saying that because no one's looking at it, because no one's really sitting there looking at the decaying atom, that somehow it doesn't decay. Nothing happens. It never decays. If I'm not looking forever, then it never decays. They're making some sort of bizarre statement like that. It doesn't make any sense at all. That somehow somebody has to collapse it. Somebody has to interact with the decaying atom. So if I put the decaying atom all by itself in another universe, it somehow will never decay because nothing will ever interact with it. What does that have to do with it? So I can light a bomb, a fuse, and I can throw the bomb into the, the empty verse, and somehow the fuse stops burning, everything stops happening, the bomb will never blow up because no one's going to interact with it. Why should anyone believe this crap?
Air molecules and photons in the box, which would bounce off differently if it has detected radiation than if it hasn't. So almost immediately, the detector becomes entangled with the state of the environment. It decoheres, branching the wave function in two. At that moment, you are split into two identical copies, one entangled with each outcome of the experiment. You continue to be identical until...
Right, so he draws it as two, but he's just saying a million events are going to happen inside that box that are going to cause this disentanglement, and they're going to cause new universes. There'll be a billion of these versions of reality. Billions of them. Made out of this one stupid box, out of this one little tiny portion of space-time, right? Billions of new universes will be the byproduct of them. And they won't require any more energy because you already accounted for all the energy by putting one Schrodinger equation over all the possibilities, and you made the universe out of a zillion, gazillion, gazillion, gazillion universes to start with. So the original universes had a zillion things in it, and now you're just creating the zillion things. The zillion outcomes. I mean, this is just so fucking idiotic.
Till you open the box. But in this case, the cat actually is alive or dead. You were just finding out by opening the box. What we are unaware of is that the other outcome also happened, just to someone who is not you anymore. I mean, both observers came from you, but they are no longer you, and they're no longer identical to each other. This interpretation of quantum mechanics is called many worlds. And
it's called horseshit is what it should be called. Just absolute crazy, fucktarded, out of your fucking anal brain fucking nonsense is what it should be called. I mean, he's basically saying, there's universes where the dinosaurs never were eradicated. I mean, it's just, what the fuck are you doing this for? This is a fucking religion. There's absolutely no good reason to believe this mush.
Formulated by Hugh Everett. And if it's true, the branching of the wave function is happening all the time. So frequently, in fact, that the rate may well be infinite. Creating infinite, subtly different worlds all the time may sound...
Yeah, it may sound like you just said a word a physicist should never say with any kind of authority. No, it could be unimaginably huge, but it can't be infinite. Because, yes, you can follow all of the chains back. Okay, all of the particles did have a history. They didn't just poof into existence, so they all have a history. And you're denying their history. You're denying them their oneness. So, this infinite crap doesn't go anywhere, logically. Unless you're going to say the universe itself is infinite. So, okay, if you're saying that somehow you have some reason to believe that the function, the amount of stuff in the universe. Well, again, even if you did that, you're still stuck with... You're still, to make it infinite, you would have to have an infinite creator of the origin bit. The first living cell, for example, or some other thing that creates all these branches. You have to have, the branches have to branch down. They can't branch infinitely in the other direction.
Plausible, to put it mildly, but consider that all those worlds are naturally part of the mathematics of quantum mechanics. Many worlds just takes them seriously. To get rid of them requires something like the collapse of the wave function.
So let's just understand. This is what you people buy in. This is doing good things with intelligence. This nonsense. You really think the aliens would think this is so cool? Oh yeah, this wacky nonsense in this really physical world we know we exist in, this real deterministic world. I mean, geez, it's just so obvious. The chains between cause and effect. You don't entangle yourself into a piano player or a violin player. No, you have to actually do all that practice crap and all that learning what the notes mean. You have to do all that crap. You don't get to just entangle your way into any of this.
The point is, our experience of reality would be the same in the many worlds picture as it is if the wave function collapses. But the formalism is so much cleaner and more elegant. All we have are wave functions that evolve under the Schrödinger equation.
So again, wave function means absolutely nothing. It just means that you've watched the wheel, the spinning wheel, and you've watched the outcomes, and you understand it has a probability based on, because there's so many variables. The ball bounces so many times, you can't follow it. You can't decide which one's going to be the outcome because there's too many variables. So just add enough variables, and all of a sudden you pretend there's no universe. It's not a physical reality anymore.
The implication is that the founders of quantum theory may have got it exactly backwards. The wave function is the complete picture of reality, and our measurement is just a tiny fraction up.
So again, probability. The wave function is just recognizing probability, and he's basically saying probability is a real thing, not something just people call it. They say it's probable, but it's not. It's inevitable. Just like Old Faithful. Okay, it's not probable. It's inevitable. All right. The engine that creates the outcome is clear. All right. And all you're saying is there's Old Faithfuls where the ground changes. All right. And so then it's all of a sudden not so reliable because the ground changes. The steam vent gets fatter, it gets thinner. And so in those circumstances, it's not inevitable. It's not determinable. It's still inevitable. It's just that we don't have a model for that. Okay, we haven't watched it. We haven't seen what its timing rate is. We don't have its wave function. But there's nothing mysterious here. No need to go down this silly lane of bullshit.
The part we become entangled with when we interact with a quantum object in a superposition. The universe also goes back to being deterministic. Every outcome happens 100% of the time. It only doesn't look that way to us because we only...
All right, well, see, back to being deterministic. So they never said that, right? I mean, when they sold this quantum mechanics in the 70s and 80s and 90s, they never said anything about, we're breaking determinism. Now, Feynman implied it a little bit, okay? He gave a little bit of an implication that, okay, yes, I'm breaking determinism. I mean, I can't remember the exact sentence, but he sort of implied that, yes, there's no determinism because it's random. All right? But most of them never sold it that way. Okay? They never sold it as this wooey verse. That's the new version now. Now they feel so much confident they're going to start talking about their Holy Ghost and the grand demons, and all the little artifacts of religion will come flying out of this crap. The magic totem pole says so.
Experience our tiny sliver of the multiverse. Now, I imagine that a lot of you have questions and possibly objections to this, so I went to the expert.
Hey.
Hello. How are you?
Come on in.
Okay, so I wanted to make this video about many worlds, but I was concerned I was going to screw it up. So I've come here to meet Cal.
You can't screw up a religion, okay? So what are you going to get wrong? You're going to talk about the magical fish story or the walking on the water story or some other bullshit? There's no expert on the subject of made-up crap. So yeah. Well, this is just so funny. Like, Sean Carroll's an expert on something. What's he expert on? Does he understand the double slit experiment? Does he know that there's two patterns that they haven't explained? Did he ever do any of these experiments? No. But he's an expert.
Back Professor Sean Carroll, who has literally written the book on many worlds.
Here's the book, Something Deeply Hidden, available wherever books are available.
Let's ask probably the common sort of YouTube questions,
Yeah.
the
Good.
arguments against this.
Yes. You know what the first
Maybe
one is?
how many worlds are there?
No, the first one is energy
The energy.
conservation. How is energy conserved? It's completely clear in the math. The energy of the whole wave function is 100% super duper conserved.
Yeah, see, and his explanation is, again, so he's not saying when these individual universes are created that they're new events at all. He's saying they're under the envelope of the whole thing. The whole equation isn't covering the universe. It's covering the multiverse. That is, all of the possible universes that could possibly branch off of the universe have already been accounted for in the big equation. So all you're doing is talking about there can't be any more energy because you made a new universe, because the new universe is in the big equation that already said there is a new universe. There's already plenty of room for it because they made the universe insanely big. So the original equation is encompassing all of the possibilities of all possible effects of all possible everything. It's already in there. The future is already in the equation. That's how big the equation is. All right. So the equation is saying we've already accounted for all the energy because we've already said it's under the same envelope of this equation. They're not making anything new.
But there's a difference between the energy of the whole wave function and the energy that people in each branch perceive. So what you should think of is not duplicating the whole universe, but taking a certain amount of universe and sort of subdividing it, slicing it into two pieces.
Right, so the real universe isn't the universe. The real universe is we're a grain of sand in the multiverse. Okay, so that's where our perspective is all wrong. We think the universe is big. Oh, wait till you see the multiverse. Really, really big.
The pieces look identical from the inside, except that one has spin up and one has spin down or something like that, but they're really contributing less than the original to the total energy of everything.
Let's ask the question about how many worlds there are, how frequently are they branching?
Right, we have no idea, is the short answer to this. I think it's embarrassing we don't have any idea. It's certainly a lot, right? The universe branches whenever a quantum system in superposition becomes entangled with its environment.
Right, yeah, right. So they have to sit there and dissect what's the average piece of matter doing? How many entangled events are there per square lump? No, let's just say per atomic weight. So if I have an atomic weight of 500 or whatever, what's the average? And once they know the average, then they can extrapolate that to the entire mass of the entire universe, and they'll still only know one segment, okay, of this. They'll know for one grain of sand, and then they still are stuck with, well, how many grains of sand are there? Infinite or double infinite?
So you have atomic nuclei in your body that are radioactive. They decay 5,000 times a second. There's a radioactive decay in your body. Every one of those either decays or doesn't. Do you think of it as
No, yeah. Every one of those either decays or doesn't by real physical circumstances. See, they don't believe that's true. They don't believe that decay is caused by real physical environmental circumstances. They think the uranium thing has some sort of spontaneous function, that it just spontaneously says, I'm going to decay. Okay, so there's no physical cause and effect. They say there's no physical cause and effect chain. No physical reason it decayed. That's what they're saying. And that's why somehow it's in some state where it doesn't know who it is or what it is until somebody looks at it. Until somebody is affected by it decaying, it didn't decay. Or something like that. It's confused. Yeah. There's no confusion. It's either decayed or not decayed, right? I mean, there's just no reason to believe it ever has to superimpose and be both things, because being both things is always being undecayed, right? I mean, doesn't the superimposed condition be the default, which was undecayed? Yeah. So it's undecayed until it decays. It's just so stupid.
Superposition. Once it decays, it sort of interacts with what's around it, becomes entangled, and the universe branches. It's wave function, right? So branching is happening many, many times a second just because
I can interact with it before it decays. It's not decayed, so interacting with it isn't the way it decays. Decaying is its own spontaneous event. It doesn't have anything to do with interaction. Yeah, I can hit it. I can hit a uranium atom, and it's not going to decay because I hit it. This is just stupid.
radioactive decays in your body. Now, is it happening infinitely often? We don't know, because we don't know whether the total number of possible branches is infinitely big or finite. It's gigantic by any stretch. There's plenty of room for all these branches to exist, and it might very well be finite, but the details hinge on things we don't understand about quantum gravity and cosmology and the theory of everything and all that stuff. So it's a big number, but we don't...
Right. So they don't know anything about this. No quantum gravity, don't have any rational theory of any of this shit. They just sit there and they say it like, whoa, we're right on the edge of it. We got it. We got our fans right around it. They're not even close. So it's just all horse shit.
I know how big.
Let's deal with the misconception that many worlds means everything that could possibly happen happens.
Yeah, that's not true. Many worlds means the wave function obeys the Schrodinger equation. That's what it means.
All right, so that's just bullshit. So they don't even know their own theory. So he said this guy's the expert, right? So he just made it kind of clear. Everything that could possibly happen happens. That's exactly what the theory says. Yes, every single thing that could happen actually does happen. All right, that's what their theory dictates. Okay, because every single entangled state is an entangled state, and it's every single one will inevitably lead to every single outcome if you do the permutations enough. Let me think of it that way. Yeah. Well, I guess well, anyway, let's see how. There's no way he unentangles that question by saying it. So he's going to use an example that's just really a bad example.
The Schrodinger equation predicts many things could potentially happen, but not everything. So, for example,
Well, see, again, the Schrodinger equation predicts many things that could possibly happen, but not everything. I'm just saying, well, no, it only predicts the possibilities. It can't predict impossibilities, right? So we know those are off the table. Only the possibilities can be predicted. So how can you have it both ways? If it's possible, then you're saying it's a fact.
electron will never convert into a proton. It would violate conservation of mass.
Right, that's not possible. So there was no theory that electrons turn into protons. No Schrodinger equation tells you that's one of the possibilities. So we already know that's not a possibility. The question is, does every possibility happen? The question wasn't, do non-possibilities happen? So there's no Schrodinger equation that predicts an electron turning into a proton. So that's a completely false premise. I mean, he's strawmanning his own argument.
Of charge, all these things that the Schrodinger equation gives zero probability to happen.
Right, exactly. So he just said zero probability. So that's not the question. The question is, does everything that's possible that doesn't have a zero probability, do every one of those events happens that doesn't have a zero probability? We all know the ones that have a zero probability don't happen. So I don't, what are you talking about? That's not the question he was asked. That's not the question he's supposed to be answering. The question he's supposed to be answering is, there's this really bizarre likelihood that this in the chalk is actually entangled, like in Pluto or something, like it wants to be there, like its twin is, or something, whatever. And there's this real improbability, like a photon would bounce off this chalk and actually go to Pluto or something. I don't know how to explain it. You know what I'm saying? Some really improbable event. Do all of those events take place?
Happen.
What about you becoming president?
Yes, that could happen.
There is a world in which you're president?
There is a world, well, to be super duper clear, it would not be me who is president, it would be a version of me.
Right, so that's more horseshit, right? Because no, it would be you, just a version that's been altered from you, okay? So it's still you, as you are right now, because it didn't happen yet. So we know it has to be a future event. So it's still going to be you, okay, but it might be you after you got run over by a car, or it might be you, blah, 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 10 years older. It might be you in a different version of you, but it's still going to be this version of you with a new life, the future, 10 years of aging, right? I mean, I was still me when I was 30, and when I was 40, I was still me, right? I was still a different guy because I had 10 years of different life experience that changed me a bit. So we're all changed, but you're not substantially different. So you can't even get that right. And then he says there's somehow, the equation says it's possible. Where did the equation say it's possible that you can be president? There's nowhere in the equation that says that that's one of the possibilities. Yeah, where did he show that? There's no math saying that's a possibility. You've just made it up as a possibility because you can imagine it. Well, because you can imagine it doesn't mean it's possible. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It doesn't mean any of that. There's no equation to predict whether you can be president. And I might be able to propose a theory that you could never be president because no one who sounds like Kermit the Frog ever was president, and blah blah. I could make some arguments about why it would be impossible for you in particular to ever be president because you have some character flaw or defect that isn't shared with any of the presidences.
Right?
But
once the branching happens, those are two separate people now.
But there is a version of you who is currently president.
Yes, that's right.
And who is tweeting.
It's a very low amplitude world. It's a very small probability, but it's there, yes.
I mean,
So there's a very small possibility. The point was, is it real? He's saying, yes, it happened, even though it was only a possibility. It wasn't an inevitability in the sense that why should the Schrodinger equation do everything? So if there's a circumstance I'm entangled and I have 10 choices of what I'm going to do because I'm entangled over a giant wave function, why is it inevitable that all of them happen?
this is the way in which it feels more complicated than, or it feels more ridiculous than Copenhagen, because Copenhagen's like...
Okay, so it's more ridiculous. He's conceding that both of these theories are nonsensical. They're both religious theories. They're both based on wooey nonsense for which we have no reason to believe any of this nonsense, that there isn't a cause and effect chain, that these things aren't real causes and effects, just like water waves, that it's real atoms banging into real atoms, that there's no fake atoms involved anywhere, there's no entangled atoms, there's no nonsense. It's a real physical phenomenon. Why do they think the other universe isn't physical? The smaller universe. Why does it all of a sudden become unphysical?
There's just one world. This is it.
That's
and,
right.
and this is what you experience in.
But look, the universe, the good old universe, forget about quantum mechanics, okay? Just like the cosmological universe, we see all the galaxies and everything. We don't see the whole universe. We see a finite amount of it because light moves at the speed of light. So there's a place beyond which we can't see. The universe could be infinitely big.
All right, so he says things like this. Again, we do know certain things, though. We know that the galaxies very far away are very fundamentally different, okay, in the sense that they're older and they're smaller and it's different. So we know there's some sort of evolution taking place. And the fact is we don't see this continuous amount of universe. So that doesn't even make sense. I mean, theoretically, if there was no origin, no place where it big banged, or even if there was a place it big banged, depending on where we are, we should be able to see in different directions, different amounts, and so a lot of questions remain unanswered. So you know nothing about that. I mean, there's no reason to speculate that the universe hasn't changed over time, because we see that it has changed over time. In the sense, there's no other explanation for why the galaxies are smaller and brighter. Why are the galaxies smaller and brighter? Something changed.
We don't know. It's certainly very plausible the universe is infinitely big. It's plausible that everywhere in the universe looks more or less like what we see, with galaxies and stars and the whole bit. If that's true, there's an infinite number of copies of people exactly like you. Some of them are presidents, some of them are winning NBA championships, some of them are supermodels, whatever. It's just that there's a lot of different shuffling around of the atoms, okay?
All right, so again, none of those things will happen, right? Some of them aren't going to be basketball players. It's not possible. So again, he says this shit, not acknowledging that we already know that there's confinements to what is possible.
Nothing to do with quantum mechanics or weirdness. Does that bother you? Does that rub you the wrong way?
Kind of.
I think, well, maybe it should.
but I agree it's less weird than the quantum idea.
And I think in both cases, it's because human beings, there's some cognitive bias. I don't know what it's called, but there's a cognitive bias that says the only probabilities for anything are 0%, 50%, or 100%.
No, there's a cognitive bias that if you're smart, and if you're educated and you thought about this stuff at all, you'd know that probability is an illusion. There is no probability. Every single event is an individual event, and it has an inevitable outcome based on cause and effect. The little ball bouncing around the roulette wheel, every one of those bounces matters to where it's going to stop. Every single one of them matters. Every single one of them is affecting where the ball is going to stop. There's no disconnect between the actual events and the outcome. And you're pretending there are no variables. Just like their field theory pretends Pluto doesn't exist and Saturn doesn't exist. Saturn creates light moving through space at certain locations, and we'll just acknowledge the existence of the photons and pretend they were spontaneously generated in that location. So there's stuff affecting me, light's bouncing off the desk and heading for me. I'll just pretend the desk doesn't exist. I'll just acknowledge that there's energy coming from that way, and it's desk-shaped. But it didn't come from the desk. I mean, they're denying the obvious causes and pretending they don't exist, so they can turn everything into math. Math can't understand the desk. It can understand the light moving towards me, but it can't understand the desk. And so it's just saying, well, to make our math easy, let's just eliminate the real causes for everything and turn everything into just a spontaneously generated field perturbation. I mean, it's such bullshit on its face.
And when I tell you something can happen, but the probability is really, 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 really low, people are like, but it can happen, right? They're like, let me focus on that possibility that it happens. I'm like, no, don't do that. It's just not sufficiently probable that it's worth worrying about anyway.
It's not sufficiently probable. If it's possible, then it's something worth worrying about. So again, just this complete disconnected from the fact. Yes, it happens, but don't worry about it. Why shouldn't I worry about that? Anyway, it's just so fucking stupid. Why do you people fall for this bullshit? This is such bullshit. This has nothing to do with science and physics and logic and reasoning and evidence. It's just a fairy story.
When the world branches here, does it branch instantly far away? The answer is, it's up to you. This is the annoying part of the answer. I can write down a description in which the branching happens instantly throughout all of space. I use that description to make predictions about what people will see. All those predictions come out 100% completely true. I can write in all
right, so just this bullshit talk like he's done any of this, right? He hasn't predicted any system with any complexity at all. So this means absolutely nothing. This is just saying I can put a point in space and a point in space, and I can pretend the points don't exist, and I can deal with just what the field's doing. Well, so can I. Yeah, that's no big deal. The only way the thing has any meaning is based on what it's reflecting, right? The light has to reflect off something for it to affect me. I can't be affected by this. If no energy bounces off of it and hits me, I can't be affected by it, right? If I negate its magnetism and negate its gravity, negate its existence, yeah, it can't affect me, right? Some force has to affect me.
Alternative description in which the branching sort of spreads out at the speed of light. And I make a different set of predictions, but guess what? They're exactly the same predictions. There's no difference between what those two pictures actually predict.
Right, because all I'm saying is what did it do to the field? So if I make it instantaneous or I make it at the speed of light, it doesn't matter, because the point I'm going to capture in time is still going to say it isn't here yet. Again, this is just.
And what this is reflecting is God doesn't know about branches. There's the wave function of the universe. That's all that really exists. Okay.
Okay. Again, the wave function includes absolutely nothing. There's no such thing as the wave function of the universe. It describes absolutely nothing. It says nothing about nothing. There's no equation that describes my hand existing. There's no equation that explains everything in the universe. This is just such crap to imply that it has this equation that somehow accounts for the existence of everything. Bullshit!
Okay? Breaking the wave function of the universe into different pieces that you and I call branches or worlds is very convenient for us human beings. But that's all it is. It's not built into the fabric of reality itself. It's exactly like the air in this room. Rather than listing the position and velocity of every single air molecule, I just tell you the temperature and the pressure and things like that, right?
Right, and it'll say absolutely nothing about the real truth. The real truth is the temperature is different in all these different locations. There's drafts, there's all kinds of differences. So again, your equation will not describe the real room. It won't describe the paintings on the walls, the bookshelves, the lamps on, the heat's coming off of it. It won't describe a single reality in the room. So it's just such horseshit for him to say that somehow I can mathematically understand it as a field. We can't understand the field without understanding the things that are affecting the field. The field is the lamp. The field is the bookshelf. The field is the walls. The field is the convection. All of those things are the field. Without those things, the field doesn't have any character. It doesn't exist.
Convenient description for us human beings. It's not the full description of the reality. And branches are exactly the same way. So if you get annoyed that there's two different ways of describing the branching, you have to remember that the whole idea of branching is just a human convenience.
So more bullshit, right? It's not convenience for me. It's a contrivance by you. It's just a contrivance. You're just contriving a way of saying I don't have to account for the energy I made by making a new universe. Because I'll just say the new universe was already predicted by the magical equation that doesn't have anything in it. That doesn't predict anything. It only predicts it after you've already seen it happen. So you see the universe create multiverses, millions of universes, and you see it do all this stuff, and then you say, well, that was the wave equation. The wave equation was it did all of that. Yeah, in hindsight, it's really easy to write a wave equation, okay? In hindsight, after you've already watched it take place. I mean, you have to know the probabilities before you can put them in the equation. Again, this is just horseshit. They're not predicting the future, okay, based on the fact that an equation tells them what the future will be. First, they have to feed the equation the possibilities. They have to already put them in the equation. I mean, again, it's like predicting something you know. Like predicting it's noon and you say it'll be 4 o'clock in 4 hours. The wave equation told me. No, it didn't. It's pathetic. So then he does a commercial for...
Hey, this portion of the video is sponsored by Norton 360.
Right. Just absolute crap, right? I mean, we've already, people should be so past this whole idea of I'm going to get spyware protection, like somebody's going to do it in some honest way, when it's I mean, just, to be selling that kind of crap just shows such a lack of integrity. Yeah, but it's all over the place. $39 for your fake protection that will do you no good, and they'll extort you for more and more money for the rest of your life. Ugh, disgusting. Alright, so enough of a video. Till the next time. I really hate you motherfucking pieces of shit. You people are just so stupid. You're so stupid on fucking goddamn purpose, clearly. You can only on purpose hate the truth to buy into this propaganda these people are puking.